Hello, this is Evan Rogerson, and I'm Mitigang here, and today we're going to go ahead and break down the Singapore tournament. So every year, Singapore usually does an event like beginning of June, around this time frame, and this is this year's event. So I'm just going to kind of break down some of the details. So before we get into the videos of finals, let me just pause that there. So there are 14 teams from 8 different schools, and most of the robots were the type of robot that you'll see in finals here, but then there were also 2 push bots and 1 hoarder, which did not make finals. Although I don't think that the design is super relevant, as usually early season, it's just other things play much more important than your robot design. It's more like, do you actually know how to drive your robot? Does your design actually score points? Even if it's not the most effective design, if it scores well, it'll do fine early season. And again, most of these robots are RA3Ds, so like when I say the robots are not good, that's not a hate on the teams or anything. I mean, they're robots in 3 days. You should have better stuff when you have months to work on them. So let's go ahead and break down some of the match videos from finals. So starting off here, we have Auton. Um, Movement from 3 of the robots there. That one Red Alliance robot does not have an autonomous. It seems like the fairly standard strategy is to go out for these corner balls there, or to the match loaders, and then try and go and score some balls. So a few different things just to keep in mind from autonomous right here, right off the start that we're already seeing, is lining up is hard. You'll see this in some of the later Autons. Also, they did best of 3 for finals here. So I don't know if I'll break down all 3 finals matches. There's probably a couple points from the other ones I want to get to, but I'm mainly going to be focusing on finals 1 here. Additionally, there are also like a lot of rules not being followed. This is just a scrimmage, so that's perfectly fine. They did best of 3 finals instead of best of 1. The robots are not following the 22-inch size constraints, as at the time that this event happened, it should have been 22-inch diagonal, not 22-inch by 22-inch square. And also, all these robots are moving their license plates, which is a clear violation. Lining up is hard. Like you can see this robot right here, it doesn't quite line up with the goal. And as somebody who's had a little bit of chance to play with the elements a bit, you do need to be lined up fairly decently from what I've seen in order to properly score. So I think this is going to be something a lot of teams are going to struggle with is they're going to drive around, load up with a bunch of balls, and go to score in the tubes, and they're just not lined up, and either all their balls miss or they just get jammed, kind of like you're seeing right there. So I definitely think autonomous consistency will be extremely important this year. I don't think that holonomic drive is the move for VRC, as X drives are going to suck at getting over the barrier, and mechanims are extremely susceptible to defense usually. Maybe H drive could be viable, but I don't necessarily think you can afford the entire motor. You could try like 5.5 watt H drive. It seems kind of silly, and you'd have to be very slow in order to have enough torque. Maybe it's worth it for lining up, because I don't really think you need a ton of motors for other stuff this year. So I don't know. Maybe that's something you teams can try. For Vex, you all probably run H drive, but I don't care if I use a bunch of extra motors on my drivetrain. That's kind of the point for Vex U anyways. Then other kind of big things that we're seeing here is over there, robots seem to like to fill up the long tubes. Color sort is going to be big this year. Make sure you have color sort. You can see this blue robot right here does score a red ball. They accidentally intake too far out. And that's part of the reason that I think this design will struggle later on in the season is it's not as easy to color sort as something like a hood robot. Although in this scenario, it actually would have been more points for them if they had scored an additional ball for the Red Alliance, because that would have pushed the blue ball down into the control zone and gotten the team an extra 10 points, whereas only scoring an extra 3 points for the Red Alliance there. So I do think it's really important that teams try and get down to that control zone bonus, as that's an entire 10-point swing that they could be getting. So I think you're definitely going to want to push down there. So I think maybe having a little bit more speed than what these robots are kind of scoring here with, more similar to that, or just more balls and you just push them all down. More balls obviously seems better because if you do go past that other line, then you could be violating rules and you'll lose the autonomous bonus automatically, which is very bad. But those are kind of the main takeaways that I have from auto is lining up is hard, make sure you have color sort, and try and get down to the control bonuses right there. And obviously, make sure you have some auto. That's better than no auto. Especially scoring in those logos is pretty easy. So even if you just like drive forward, turn, drive forward, outtake, that's pretty easy. Shouldn't take you much more than 10, 15 minutes. And even just scoring right there would be a ton of points because you get the 3 points from the logo, but then you also go ahead and get the 6 points from the control bonus. So that would be 9 points, which is the same that that robot got net wise. And then that robot does go ahead and do some match loading at the end. Something that, yeah, just always, I mean, use the time that you have, even if it's not scoring points, just to try and position yourself better. Same thing with that robot heading over towards the middle. So I believe blue does take it here. And let's go ahead and watch driver control. So again, most of these robots cannot score very well. It does seem like the strategy that these teams are using right at the beginning is to empty out their match loaders, which is what these team robots are doing. That robot already did that at the beginning of auto, end of auto, sorry, and then go and try and get to the goal straight away. Now, you're not going to see a ton of D-scoring here. Mainly because most of these robots don't have dedicated D-score mechanisms. Like something like a cylinder that just, like a pneumatic cylinder that just pops out can definitely D-score a lot, but you don't really see that on these kind of robots. The center goals you'll see staying pretty empty, so there's not really a huge incentive to D-score. You do see that one other blue robot right there going and just kind of pushing a ball in right at the beginning, which I think is definitely a fine maneuver just to try and secure that bonus early on. And the other team might be able to forget about it. Also, because it's in the middle and there's no other balls there, it is a little bit harder to D score just because the goal isn't full. And again, these teams don't have good D score mechs yet. I think given the lack of D scores, trying to fill up your long goals is definitely probably the best strategy here. And then you can see, again, what both of these teams are doing is they're or that team already did earlier in the match, and this team now, is they're just running their intakes and clearing out the other team's colors because it starts with your three on the bottom, then three of the other team, and then you can finally get your own max load zones. Although it is important to note you only have to clear out one of your tubes in order to max load, which is what this Red Alliance seems to have done over there, as they're just leaving those three blue balls in there. Although it does leave them easy pickings for the other alliance to then come over and get, but it is only three balls. And again, just loading up, which is again what I think you'll start to see as more robots get higher and higher capacity. These robots look like they can only fit about 6 balls, which isn't really enough down to lock down the game. If you go up in the top right corner here, you'll see my video about how you can lock down the game if you have a capacity of around 15 balls. But given that they're robots, I think that's definitely the right maneuver of fill up and try and get to the long goal. You'd definitely be leaving yourself susceptible for a D score, but again, most of these robots don't have good D score mechs. And basically, yeah, they're just loading that out, and that's really good. That's a lot of points. That gets you the control bonus. And then we have this blue robot just trying to put one on. That really doesn't do a whole lot. So I'm not sure what kind of the point is. Also, just something that I've noticed is it's really hard to see which balls are actually scored just based off of cameras. I'm sure it's much easier to see IRL, but just something to note for live stream viewers. And again, defense seems to be pretty prevalent here. As you can see, that blue robot, this is one of the robots that can't score as well. Definitely playing some heavy defense on the red robot. And kind of like I said during auto, lining up is really important. And these guys just getting pushed. So I definitely think you'll see teams implement breaks. This was something teams started to do in tipping point. So if you tip the platform on them, their robot just stayed on the platform, which allowed them to park much earlier than other teams. So I think you'll start to see a return of breaks, basically just pneumatics pushing it down into the ground, so that if somebody tries to push you, you won't get moved. Because you can definitely do that if you have good brakes. Also part of the reason why I'm thinking of running H drive for VexU, as you can just push sideways into them with really high torque. But again, that would require motors that VRC doesn't really have access to, unless you went insanely slow with very, very high torque. And then nothing's really happening here, which I think is kind of the strategy wise here. Again, most of these robots can't do things that you would want to do strategically. Like red really should be trying to like put some balls down in there, or just do a big D score on that entire tube. Like line up and just use like a pneumatic cylinder just to push a bunch of these balls out right there. Same thing for blue. Probably should try and get around there and do a big D score would be good. But given that they can't do these, I think a better thing would probably be just trying to like fill up the ends and then push down. You'll kind of see that with one of the blue robots a bit later on. Yeah. So they put two on, and now they have this stick out the side of their robot there, you can see. And they're going to go ahead and use that to just try and push some of their balls in through the top. And it does go through the top, that's completely legal to do. However, there's a couple issues with both the way that they implemented it physically on their robot and then how it strategically works during the match. First of all, that doesn't actually get them the control bonus. I believe it ties it. So cool, they did take away 10 points from red, but they didn't give them the 10 points themselves. So I think if you are going to do something like this, you do need at least 3 balls in there in order to be able to get the control bonus. Additionally, I think having something that can go in and out and isn't always extended is also going to be quite good. As you can see, they have to line up. They do kind of struggle with lining that up in there. But I think if you could like flip that up or something, the other thing that would let you do is then you could go down to the other end and pull out 3 or 4 balls from there, which would then give you like 12 points, which is a good number of points to be able to do in a single action like that. And again, you can see red just trying to line up and push some balls out down the control zones. But again, a D score would definitely be much more effective there. It's just these robots don't have D score mechanisms yet. But yeah, the main thing is lining up is very hard. You're very susceptible to defense. Like you can see that robot just, they were trying to score there, tried to line themselves up, got pushed out of the way. And basically, near the end of the match, it kind of turns into fighting over the center goal, like I predicted, as because you can get off a quick D score, yes, when there's only 10 seconds left, it's harder to do rather than just D scoring right at the beginning. So you can see Red Robot comes over there and tries to put out 2 balls in order to get the control bonus. However, again, defense is just huge this year, which is why I think, again, breaks. You want to put down your breaks before you go ahead and get rammed by the other team. Because if they got another red ball up there, that would have shifted it. The control First of all, they would have scored an extra ball, which is 3 points, and then they would control bonus would have gone from neutral to the Red Alliance, which would have gotten them an extra 8 points. So that would have been 11. They got 11 points by that movement. If they put another ball down, they would have gotten another 11 points. So again, that's a really effective way. That movement could have been 22 points. They still managed to get 11 out of it. So I think that's really important. As you'll see, these scores here are only around 40, so a 22-point swing from a single maneuver is a lot. And even then, you can see, I don't remember when that happened, but that blue ball's already D-scored, and the bottom goals are just really easy to D-score out. The center ones, very easy to D-score. Long goal ones, you do need a bit more of a dedicated mech, I think. Something else interesting I'm noting here is parking is obviously very easy to do. However, if there are balls in there, you kind of start to see the team struggle. Like you can see this red robot, they're lining up, but then they're kind of getting stuck on the balls that are inside the zone. They do manage to get in. The blue robot does not, though. You can see there, they get stuck up on the balls. I don't think you'll see this as much later in the season, as obviously most of these balls are going to be scored. So you're not going to be getting stuck on them if they're scored. But I think early season, yeah, maybe if you don't have a good hoarder robot, you could just try and plow a bunch of the other team's balls into their zone. If you could do that in one quick movement. Like I know spin up logo, there were definitely opportunities that you could just kind of like plow a bunch of discs into your logo or out of the other team's logo, especially in the early season when there were lots of discs still on the ground. And that kind of wraps up match one. Red Alliance did win. Yeah, you can see 60-40 here. Those are the rough kind of scores we're going to get. I think it will move to lower scores as the season progresses once teams get good D-score mechanisms because these long goals are pretty full. Center goals, again, you don't really need a mech to D-score. Long goals, you kind of do. Moving on, there's a couple things I want to point out for match two. Probably won't go through the whole match. You can see auto plays out quite similarly. Lining up is hard to do. And then you can see even the red robot didn't quite line up. And blue did get a couple things out of the match load zone, which will win the auto for blue. And they try and score the balls in the logo, but again, lining up is hard. Things play out things play out pretty similarly for the start of the match. Teams go to their match load zones, try and get the stuff out. You can see here teams are kind of going for the center goals a little bit more at the beginning of the match, which didn't quite work out for blue last time as the Red Alliance was able to get control. So I think that, yeah, staying away and then filling up long goals at the beginning with your match loads definitely seems to be the strategy. And defense, again, huge, even there on the match loaders. Empty out at least one tube. That way you can just start loading up and then drive back down to the long goals to be able to fill it. That's a very easy movement to do. I especially think for VexU, because for VexU you can match load during auto. I definitely think you'll see teams just sitting there loading up a ton of balls and then going and driving backwards, as you don't even have to turn, so quite easy. Again, with the Blue Alliance on their D-score mech, you can kind of see them using it there. However, they went a little bit too far and actually didn't get the ball to the control zone. It slid all the way from too far on this side to too far on that side. Although again, I think if you could insert that, like raise it in and out, putting that in like right in that gap you can see right there and being able to push out those 2 red balls along with your own blue ball, that still gets you a point swing. And there definitely will be scenarios where those would be like 3 or 4 red balls that you could go ahead and get some quick points from. Yeah, defense right there. And again, this one's a little bit low scoring of a match, so you're kind of going to see the teams doing similar things throughout. A lot of defense. You can see those goals as I'm skipping through. There's not really a lot of scoring going on. Red occasionally getting some shots in. And then again, near the end of the match, you do start to see some plays for the middle. Like you can see, blue does have the center goals controlled, and they're just kind of trying to protect them, driving around there. And again, parking can be a little bit of a challenge just because of the balls in there. And Red Alliance going for some last second scoring. Again, I don't think parking is going to be super viable because just by scoring that one ball in there, that is a 9-point swing because it takes away 6 points from blue, gives red 3 points, and a park is only 7. So even just by single parking, That's still worth more by just doing that last second swing, and parking can be quite challenging with all the balls in there. You can see these teams are kind of struggling a little bit. And that was actually a tie. So we'll go ahead, finals three. Again, similar things. Team scoring balls, not getting the control bonus, having a hard time lining up. You can see in this match, what especially stood out to me is that blue robot right there is playing very, very heavy defense on the red alliance, and you're going to see even less points scored. Like, they're basically just parking themselves inside, which does make sense, because if you can get yourself in front of the long goals, it's really hard to get the other team. Like, if they drive around, you're always going to be closer to it than them. So it's pretty easy to just lock down an opponent's play, which is again why part of the reason why I think you'll see teams camping at the end of the long goals, because once you get there, the other teams can't get out. You want to load up on balls with really high capacity, and then that way you only have to line up once. And then once you line up, if you have breaks, and then once you line up, if you have breaks, you can just kind of sit there. But again, you don't want to be spending most of the match lining up, as because they're only really able to get one or two balls off before the other robot comes over and just kind of de-scores them. Or not de-scores, plays defense on them. And this kind of continues. Not a lot of ball scoring you'll see. Red Alliance does manage to get off one really good load right there. So you definitely do still need to focus on offense and can't be purely defense focused, I don't think. And again, last second plays, we're starting to see around 25 seconds. Red Alliance does go up and try and get a control on the long goal, but even then, some of their balls are getting knocked out even just by driving into the goals, not even actively trying to de-score. And you can see these teams definitely trying to just fight over the center goal, going for a park. Again, it can be hard to park when there are lots of balls in there. And then again, going for some last second de-scores here. Blue trying to get last second control bonus. Again, they didn't even try and park this time around, because I think if you can get those control bonuses, their mechanism just couldn't quite get them past the white tape line, which I think really struggled. Again, you want to get at least 2 balls in there, ideally 3 if the other team already has balls in there, in order to be able to really secure those control bonuses. And that's kind of that for this tournament. So overall, it played out pretty similarly to what I expected at the level of play that it's at. I think you'll definitely see the game turn more to locking down as robots get higher capacity and they're able to just kind of camp and sit at the end of the goals, as obviously we can only hold 6 balls. That's not really super strategically viable. And once teams get bigger D-score mechs, leaving those balls undefended in the goals also becomes less viable. So thanks for sticking around to the end. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.